cultural worker, singer, lawyer, Harvard. I didn't go to Harvard, but Jack Lake lawyer. Rose Sanders. Come on up here, girl. Rose Sanders. Rose Sanders. The else would be crazy not to get back. So Rose Sanders, we want to thank you for coming, and the floor and the mic is yours.
Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eye on the prize. Hold on. Human rights activists in the house. We're gonna turn America out. Just keep your eye on the prize. Hold on. You know, that's exactly what we have to do, brothers and sisters. What happened November the 2nd set some people back, but not me. It inspired me to hold on and to work more, to work longer. I just woke up November the 3rd determined to hold on.
Hello.
I first have to just recognize someone you've already recognized, but we cannot recognize him enough. And I know that our brother Shuttlesworth is still here because God sent him an angel. And I want you to give a big round of applause for this angel, Mrs. Shuttlesworth. All right. Mrs. Shuttlesworth. You know, it's so easy to just honor our heroes, but without their mates and their partners, they could not be here as long as they are. Amen. Last week in Selma, we funeralized a 100-year-old warrior.
Wow.
Annie Cooper.
Oh.
Annie Cooper. She is a sister. If you know about the Selma movement, when Jim Clark dared to push her down, she knocked him out.
Yes.
That's Annie Cooper.
Good for her.
And because she knocked him out, he took her behind the Selma jail and beat her so bad that it gave her cancer in the mouth. And they gave her 4 months to live. That was 55 years ago or less, and she only died last week. That is the power of the people. I'm supposed to talk about culture. Well, you know, Annie Cooper gives me an opportunity to talk about culture. Because culture is the root of struggle.
That's right.
Let me hear y'all say that. Culture is the root of struggle. Without culture, there is no identity. People have no identity.
That's right.
Without what? Without culture, people have no identity.
That's right.
And if you don't have an identity, you don't have consciousness.
That's right.
And if you don't have consciousness, you don't have vision.
That's right.
This just came to me when I was sitting downstairs with you, Gwen. And if you don't have vision, you don't have the willingness or the need to struggle.
That's right.
So, culture is the root of what? Struggle. Y'all didn't hear me. I said culture is the root of what? I ain't got to 5 more minutes. Culture is the root of what? Struggle. That's why one of the worst human rights violations that have taken place in the world happened right here in America.
That's right.
Some of the worst cultural terrorists in the world are your fellow Americans. Because it was here in America where they took the culture away from the African and tried to destroy the Native American. When we realize that culture is the root of struggle, then we will understand that our struggle has to be what our sister started out with. Y'all give that sister a hand. She is so awesome. I love her. You understand why she sings My Country 'Tis of Thee. You will understand why she sings Something Inside of Me is so strong. Because she realized even though they did everything to cut away our culture, they couldn't go far enough Because there's something so strong and so deep that they, even though when we came here, forced to come here in their enslavement ships, even though they made it a crime to read and to speak your language and to love your man and to love your woman and to love your God, even though they criminalized everything about our culture, even to play our drum, it was a crime. And they thought that they had cut us completely away from our culture. Because they understood even before we that culture is the root of what? But my God, look at these sort of like she rose and he rose in the house. Why is it in the 50s and the 60s when they thought, when the oppressor thought they had done everything to cut away our culture, how is it that that struggle took place? The answer is clear. In spite of their best efforts, they failed.
That's right.
And your presence here tonight is evidence of their failure. That's why I ain't worried about nobody. I ain't worried about who's in the White House who think they might be there next time. Because you in this room, you understand the culture is the root of struggle. And as long as there are people on the face of the planet that understands that, there will be struggle and there will be victories. And so, I don't want to go over my time. I just want to remind us not to be weary, not to give up, not to be discouraged. My husband comes from a family of 13.
Wow.
And I thought I was poor, but I was upper middle class. I didn't never miss the meal. I used to complain about having them beans, but God, them beans tasted good. He came from a family whereby they were out of food. Because they lived in a 1-2-room house, not a 2-room bed house. But anybody that knew his mother, Old May Sanders, you would know that she understood that culture is the root of struggle.
All right, now.
Because even though she had a 7th grade education, she told her children stories. She kept alive the memory. They remembered. And one thing she told them that I keep it in my spirit as if I was there, because I think my mother had the same spirit. She would bring her children close to her when there was no more food in the house. And when she didn't know if they could make it another day, she would gather all those babies around her. And she would say, don't worry, babies. Don't worry, children. Because when things are at their worst, I am at my best. I want y'all to say, when things are at their worst, we will be at our best. That's why I'm not worried about the carpetbaggers.
Don't worry about
the G-baggers. The right wing, the left wing, because I know that those of us who believe and believe it from the bottom of our hearts that culture is the root of struggle and that we First march, 600 people. They were. There was. It's amazing though, because in spite of the brutality, no one was killed that day, and there were very few arrests.
Was it the first march where John Lewis and others were brutalized?
The first march was led by John Lewis, Jose Williams,
right.
Albert Turner, and the 2 women closest to the front of the march were really the she-roes of the movement that are rarely mentioned.
And who were they?
Marie Foster, who lived to be in her early 90s, and Amelia Boynton. These were the women who did the foundational work before Dr. King came. In fact, it was Amelia Boynton who wrote a letter in 1963, 2 letters asking Dr. King to come to Selma. Of course, he didn't come to 65, so they did the foundational work. Well, they were the closest to the front of the march, but the men, of course, led the march. And
these are unheralded women. Maybe.
And what's so interesting is that the beatings, I've actually put a mirror where the beatings actually started, where John and Jose kneeled to pray, but that landmark is completely ignored by the Park Service and ignored by the people. So it was really, the beating started about a football, a field and a half away from the bridge. That's where they kneeled to pray, and they were beaten back across the bridge.
This is the Pettis Bridge?
Yes. Amazingly, nobody was killed, but a woman who still lives in Selma, Annie Neal Avery, Miss Avery, was arrested because when the cops attacked her, even though she was a part of the nonviolence movement, she said, "No, you cannot beat me like this." She calls it a physical disagreement that she engaged in. Well, we know that at the end of the story that the final march, thousands of people joined, but in the process, other people died. Faya Rosa, she's killed at the end of the Selma Montgomery March. That she's transporting people back to Selma. She's killed. Reverend Reed is killed really before the third march. He hears the cry from King, Dr. King, and people, ministers, and of all religions and faiths come to Selma.
Now, they were killed by the police or by the Klan?
Well, with the support of the police, there was not very little difference between the police and the Klan.
One and the same, basically.
You know, some wore white sheets, some wore black suits.
Right.
But the whole system protected terrorism against black people and civil rights workers for 100 years. There was, even the federal government would not pass an anti-lynching law or anti-hate law. There was totally no protection. Even when people were arrested, they were rarely found guilty by all white male jurors. That's why Dr. King would say, maybe with the Voting Rights Act, we'd have black jurors. We'll have black judges and DAs. And then and only then will we get some justice. That was part of this history that people don't talk about directly. That was one of the greatest benefits. Not just that we got the Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, but for the first time we had some protection against domestic terror. Because up to this time, this government did not protect her own people. So we talk about, oh, these dictators are killing their own people in these other countries. Well, it was allowed in America for over 300 years if you count slavery, and nothing was done to protect.
Slavery is highly organized terrorism.
Right. Organized terrorism. And up until the 64 and 65 Act, there was no legal protection. So that was the greatest victory. But, so 6 months after the march from Selma to Montgomery, and by the way, one other person was killed during this time, Jonathan Daniels. He was killed in Lowndes County. So you had more people was killed now. A lot of them we don't know about. Reverend Dobbins was beaten so bad the night Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed. He died later. Okay, he was one of the leaders of that march. And we have a book called Martyrs of the Movement, and I'll show it to you so you can put it on the film that we sell at the museum that the Jubilee generated. So, no, that's not it. Let me get it right quick.
Okay.
We wanted people to read the stories of these marchers. And, of course, even on the front, we have some of the people. Of course, Medgar Evers died in Mississippi.
Right.
Same day Medgar Evers was killed in Mississippi, Bernard Lafayette was working in Selma, and they tried to kill him. The plan was to kill civil rights people in several southern states. They only succeeded, unfortunately, in Mississippi. Here's Faya Rosa. She was killed, of course, in Selma. And to this day...
she was a freedom rider?
She was a housewife in Detroit who saw the Bloody Sunday March and said, I got to become a part of this. Her daughter...
I remember seeing her story on national television.
Yeah, her daughter's a part of our board. What's so gruesome and totally incomprehensible is that there are white people in Selma right now that attack her and try to demonize her and her motives for coming. They sell this demonic materials about her.
Even up to today.
Now to this day. And of course this is a picture of Jimmy Lee Jackson right here. Of course this is a good one in chaining the people that were killed in Mississippi. So the Jubilee.
So let's back up. Before we talk about the Jubilee, just spend a little bit more time on the events of that day, that fateful day itself. When they unleashed the dogs and police mercilessly beat John Lewis and others. What was he? Were you present there?
No, I wasn't.
But from what you've heard, what was the atmosphere like in that on that bridge?
I just can't think of no other word but terrorism. And because the whole purpose was to perpetuate this ungodly belief that white men were ordained by God to rule the universe and certainly the South. And that anyone who interfered or dared to challenge their authority to do so could be jailed and even killed. And I think it would have been far worse if the cameras weren't there.
That's what I was going to say, but it backfired in the sense that
It did.
those images were caught on tape.
Yes.
The media was there. They
Yes.
reported on it, right? It came to the attention of the president and Congress and the country. And, you know, it helped to change minds.
It did. And that's the power of the nonviolent movement, because irrespective of how you feel about nonviolence as a tactic or strategy or philosophy, you know, they had all the guns. They had all the weapons, the dogs, the tear gas. Our people just had their determination, their will to be free and to have voting rights. And I think at that time and that space, nonviolence was the only logical, rational response to that violence. Because when people saw that response, it really did affect the consciousness of people all over the country. But the night that Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed, the press was there too, but the press was attacked and all the cameras were smashed. So therefore, there's no footage of what happened. Let me tell you, even among good people, racism raised its ugly head, because the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson and Bloody Sunday touched the conscience of America, but President Johnson really moved a little quicker and a little faster when Reverend Reed was killed. And it's documented that the response to Reverend Reed's killing was different from Jimmy Lee Jackson's killing. The killing of the white man. So even in death, even with good people, the response was different. So the death of Reverend Reed really, I think, in my personal opinion, encouraged the president to say, look, we can't wait for no amendment to the Constitution. We have to have an act that I can get passed quickly and swiftly. And of course, the man that killed Reverend Reed is living in Selma right now. He has become rich through the ignorance of black people. He has a car dealership right down the street where he allegedly killed Reverend Reed. I say allegedly because since an all-white male jury found him not guilty, but we know CNN did a special establishing his guilt. And because of the ignorance of our people, and when I say ignorance, let me explain that. It's not taught in school. It's not talked about in churches. It's institutionalized ignorance. It's institutionalized in the sense that public schools and churches have been programmed not to teach it, not to present it.
Right.
So the people are suffering from a lack of knowledge, so they don't know, so they continue to go to support businesses that did everything they could to keep them from the ballot box.
Right.
And those people are still, many of those people are still living in Selma. It was just last year when a majority of black city council would not be where they were if it had not been for the bloody Sunday and the sacrifices of these civil rights people and others. Yet this majority black council allowed 3 whites on the council to convince them to give an acre of land to an extremist group, the Friends of Forest, i.e. Nathan Forrest, first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, founder of the Ku Klux Klan. This majority black council gave them an acre of land to honor this Klansman.
A majority black council?
Yes.
How do you explain that?
This same, that's another interview, but I'm glad to give it. The same black council, when we tried to get them to name a street after Amelia Boynton. Miss Boynton is 109 years old. She's known as the mother of the voting rights movement. It was her and her husband that laid the foundation for the movement. Well, this summer, they would only name 4 blocks, maybe 5, after her and her husband on the street with her house, Lapsley, where Dr. King came, others came to strategize and to organize the movement. A whole acre to, here's Miss Boynton, as a young woman. She's now 109. I'll give you this first story. 5 little short blocks on Lapsley Street to honor her. Yet an acre given to an extremist white supremacist group to honor the Klan and the Confederate soldiers.
Unbelievable.
Now that's another. I have a story about why, but
well, let's get to that later.
yeah. But one reason why the Jubilee was started, I founded it over 20 years ago, is because history was not being taught. How do you bring history alive? How do you animate it? How do you just engulf it and culturize it in such a way that people have to acknowledge that it's there?
Right.
And that's why we started the Bridge Crossing Jubilee.
Stick a pin right there. Let's get back to the events of Bloody Sunday.
Okay.
We talked about the impact it had on the Johnston administration. But what impact did it have on the civil rights movement itself at that time?
Good and bad.
Talk about both.
Well, the good news is, for the first time, we got the right to vote after 100 years, because we had it through the 15th Amendment. Black men could vote, and hundreds were elected to office all over the South.
Right. Including the Senate, U.S. Senate.
Yes, from Mississippi, congressmen, legislators, all taken away through domestic terrorism, by the way. So you have a restoration, a new renaissance, okay?
Right.
A new renaissance, a new reconstruction, where again we began to get black mayors, black judges, black city councilmen, black, politically.
Right.
And then of course, women. Even though the 19th Amendment gave white women and all women the right to vote, it actually fueled the whole political scene. So you have more brown people getting elected, more women getting elected. So it had an impact to change the political landscape of America. That's the good side. The problem is, since the civil rights movement did not embrace the Black Power movement, the Black is So Beautiful movement, the movement, the African Studies movement, all this was the Black Arts movement. All these movements were going on and being fertilized at the same time. But to me, in my humble opinion, they never united. And it took all of them to bring us real strength and liberation. So you had the Black is So Beautiful movement, you had the movement, let's put African Studies in school. But you never heard civil rights people talk about that much. And you didn't hear the cultural people talk about civil rights. You didn't hear the Black Panther Party talk about civil rights. It just was not. And of course, the government did all they could to keep us divided and separated. So the downside is, because that history is not known, and because we thought that simply by getting the right to vote and the removal of the white-only signs, that we were free. And since the images of what they did to on Bloody Sunday, and the images of what happened to Malcolm and Medgar and the 4 little girls in that church and the 2 little boys that were killed outside the church, we soon forgot. I never knew. And it was easy for the propagandists, the propaganda that America, now we have liberty and justice for all. Finally, the Declaration of Independence includes all of us. That's why to this day you have black people on the 4th of July. They don't even know that on July 4th, 1776, their people were enslaved. They don't know it. They don't know that we remained enslaved for almost another 100 years. This history is intentionally kept out of the schools, and they go to churches where they see a white Jesus, and the whole myth of white supremacy is reconfirmed. There's very little knowledge of geography, because in the Bible it makes references to places that are clearly in Africa, but we are so institutionally miseducated that deliberate miseducation has distanced us from the truth about who we are, and we claim to believe that we're made in the image of God. That's what really mystifies me. Right. How can you know God and not know yourself? Right. So you ask, that's a short answer. So in the process, we have generations of people, 2 generations, who really truly believe, especially since we have President Barack Obama, that this is a post-racial society, that there is no longer racism. My daughter by marriage teaches at the University of Mississippi. She was amazed there was a conversation between two students, a white Southerner and a black upper middle class student from the South. The white Southern student, and he's rare now, he's an exception, trying to convince the black student that there was still racism in America. That is typical of the attitudes of many, of especially middle class black children and brown children who are brought up in families who don't want them to struggle, who don't want them to see race. So that's the downside of it. So now we have an attack on voting, we have an attack on immigration, immigrants, attack on health care, all the things that were fought to secure during the Civil Rights era. And last summer when the Supreme Court gutted the heart out of Section 5, you know, what has been the outcry?
Right.
I think we're one of the few organizations in the South, SOS, a movement for justice and democracy. We've taken several buses protesting in Washington, but there were no thousands of people to embrace us, because somehow even some of us who are conscious somehow believe we'll be all right. You know, we'll be all right. Let's not worry too much about margin.
Faya, let's segue from there to your views on the Moral Mondays movement.
I'm a part of it.
That is focusing on the attacks against voting rights.
I'm a part of the Moral Monday movement. This past Monday, we had Reverend Barber was in Alabama at the state capitol, but there were not huge groups of people there, because even though we've tried to start the Moral Monday movement in Alabama, it hasn't caught on, but we're building. 7 of us, including myself, was arrested during the week of moral action on Voting Rights Day about 2 weeks ago. But we can only get 7 people, but it's growing. Even Reverend Barber will tell you it was 7 years before they got 17 arrested. We're doing good. 2 years, we got 7 arrested. So we are in close alliance with Reverend Barber. I've asked him to come to the Jubilee to help lead us again. He was there last year at the Jubilee for 3 days, giving workshops and leading marches. So I do believe there's an army rising, slowly but surely. And we're working with people of all races and religions now. We're working with the Muslims. We're working with labor. We're working with Jewish people, white people. Now some people say, oh, well, since Farrakhan is involved, we're not going to be involved. Well, you know what? You stay over there, because we are inclusive. So if you want to play a hate, you don't play a hate on these extremist white Republicans, right? Okay? So we're not going to let you play a hate on our brother, Minister Farrakhan. So we do have a movement that's building with the Moral Monday movement.
Good. Well, let's talk about the Jubilee celebrations. It's been, I mean, what you're planning to do for the 50th anniversary. But prior to that, there's been a march every year.
Every year.
Right? And talk a little bit about the history of those marches and what's special about the 50th anniversary. What special plans are in place for the 50th anniversary?
Well, to give you a little foundational history, SCLC started these marches every 5 years back in 1970. My husband and I just moved back, and we were very supportive of Dr. Lowry, but they were only doing the marches every 5 years. We felt that the history was so important that it was not only important to reenact the marches, but to tell the stories and to do it in a way that young people would be attracted to listen. So we decided to have many events to attract and to appeal to a variety of people of all ages. So not only did we decide to reenact the marches, but we decided to have a music festival to bring in the music. We brought in the original freedom singers to teach the songs of the movement. We have what we call the Children's Sojourn, where the stories about the movement are told to the children. We show footage of what happened on Bloody Sunday, so students, especially at the high school level, can begin to embrace the history. We even have parades where people come from around the state with their bands. We have workshops on voting rights, immigrant rights, health rights. So the whole idea was to have a variety of events to really begin to inspire people to embrace the history in such a way that they would act on it, that they would appreciate the right to vote, that they would move forward and to begin to think critically about candidates who would preserve and to advance that history rather than trying to detract.